Well, welcome to those who are just joining us. We're going to let the room fill up a little bit, but we are so excited that you are joining us this evening. So as the room fills up, we have a couple of fun facts for you. Okay. So welcome, 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 welcome. And we know that people are still trickling in, but I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Sinead Young, and I'm a professor of psychology here at Morehouse College. If we were on campus, I'd be able to give you a big warm welcome to our campus. But since we're virtually, I still extend a warm greeting to you wherever you are. This evening, we are thrilled, we are honored, we are privileged to have just an amazing panel for you. So this evening, the title of our panel presentation and screening is College Behind Bars. Hopefully you all have seen excerpts, if not the whole documentary. It's amazing. And tonight we are joined by a couple of individuals who you may recognize from the documentary, as well as some of the faculty who are part of our prison initiative here at Morehouse College, and some of our community partners as well. And so this evening is going to be a rich discussion where we're going to discuss education in prison institutions. And we'll also talk about what happens when folks come home. So it's going to be a great discussion. We encourage you to use the Q&A box to ask questions. And this is just part one of a two-part discussion. And so without further ado, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Winfield Murray from Morehouse College. Winfield, take it away.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Winfield Murray, and I am a practicing attorney, as well as a professor of moot court, constitutional law, and race and law here at Morehouse College. I recently had the profound opportunity to teach at the Burr State Prison through a partnership between Common Good Atlanta and Morehouse College. It was a life-changing experience. In fact, that's actually an understatement. Tonight, I welcome you to a riveting discussion that highlights the transformative work Morehouse, the Georgia Coalition of Higher Education in Prison, and Common Good Atlanta are doing around prison education and reentry. It is our sincere hope that you will have a better understanding of how you can support these issues and further expand educational opportunities in Georgia. You are going to hear directly from people on the front lines of prison education. During our discussion, we will highlight clips from the film documentary, College Behind Bars, and then go into our discussion. Again, thank you for attending. And now we will begin with our first clip.
I've been incarcerated for 13 years. And from my experience, I can tell you, prison is here to punish us. It's here to warehouse us. But it's not about rehabilitating. It's not about creating productive beings. It just isn't.
Call me Ismael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, Have little or no money in my purse and nothing particular that interests me on the show. I thought I would sell about a little and see the watery part of the world.
I'm taking Moby Dick. That's a really interesting class. The whole first paragraph we had to memorize, and each one of us had to recite in front of the rest of the class. You would see another guy in the class in the yard, and we would be like, hey, call me Ismael, and he would go through it, and I would go through it, and we'd point out where we didn't match.
I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. Is the way I have of regulating the spleen and regulating the...
Is the way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation.
Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hyposter gets such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping out into the streets and methodically knocking people's hats off their heads, then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can.
How would you feel about that?
Thank you. Audience, I would like to introduce and welcome Giovanni Hernandez. He is one of the Barred Prison Initiative students featured throughout the College Behind Bars documentary. Giovanni, first and foremost, I want to say thank you for being here. I also had an opportunity to listen to the podcast that you did with one of the Morehouse students. I was very impressed, actually just blown away. And we've just watched a few minutes of this powerful documentary. So I just want to spend a few minutes asking you a couple of questions around the documentary and around prison education and reentry. So Giovanni, can you start by telling our audience how you became involved with the film?
Yeah, sure, Winterfell. Winfield, thank you again for having me on this panel. I'm just super excited and honored to be here on this panel with all these distinguished folk. And you know, really wish that I could be there in person. And with plans for the future in the spring, absolutely. To address your question, it was honestly, I don't actually know how I became a part of this film. They approached me about maybe asking me a few questions. I was a bit hesitant, but I said, hey, why not, you know? It wouldn't hurt. And I think that it was more, when speaking to Lynn and Sarah later on, I think it was more a matter of Lynn hearing my story and also just seeing how I engaged and how the other alumni engaged with me. And so seeing, basically finding the interest in these engagements, these conversations that she caught us having in the library, right? And finding that more interesting than doing one-on-one interviews. And I think that sort of growing from that sort of epiphany, I kind of found my way as one of the subjects of the film. Not, like I said, not without my hesitations. They definitely did the work to gain our trust prior to us, revealing our stories and being as open as we were with them about our histories and and just our experiences.
Giovanni, that's actually a question that I have. How did Lynn, the director, and her staff, how did they gain your trust to feel comfortable enough to share your story?
Oh, well, what they did is they actually spent a lot of time coming in without cameras, right? So they spent a lot of time just conversing with us as people, just trying to get to know who we are and us to know who they are, and an idea of like what they have envisioned this film to be. Our interest was that we didn't want this film to sort of perpetuate the same narrative that's been perpetuated in the film, throughout Hollywood and media. We wanted this film to be, a more exact portrayal of what's going on in these spaces, right? Given the opportunity, given, the right programming, and what's capable. So yeah, they gained our trust basically by coming in and not being filmmakers, but being people trying to get to know us, as not as subjects necessarily, but as just the students and the people that we were. And it was us on our end. We were just trying to get to know them, I guess, as filmmakers and as people, right? We wanted to know if they sort of, their beliefs fell in line with our beliefs, right? If their vision for it was the same as our vision for it.
Sure, no, that makes sense. And I think you make an excellent point about them wanting to get to know you. And you've talked generally about reservations that you have, but did you have any specific or personal reservations with regard to participating in the documentary? Any that were just personal to you?
I think I took a lot of time and I did consider it greatly, right? I'd spent lots of nights just thinking about whether I did want to put myself out there, whether I wanted, whether I wanted the world to know that I'd been formerly incarcerated in that manner, right? People that I didn't even know would know. I had no control basically over that, who knew that information, and whether that it was worth, what could come of this film. Whether, I thought about like, the impact that it could have on my family. But ultimately, I found that I believed in the impact that this film could have, right, on the larger conversation and on the narrative about who we are, who people who are incarcerated are, right, and what they're capable of. For me, it was worth it, right? I felt like I'd reached the point where I knew who I was, and I was comfortable with the fact that, like, if people felt like judging me for that, like, that was fine. Like, it didn't take away from who I knew me to be.
Sure. I have to say that I watched the documentary and I was, again, I think I'm going to say this all night. I was blown away. And, having the opportunity to recently teach inside of a prison, I thought that this documentary captured a lot of what I experienced. But I wanted to ask you, did you realize when you were filming this documentary how powerful and inspirational it would be?
No, actually, I had no idea. Because and when you're filming, you don't get to see the other side, right? You don't get to see the edited finished product. You only know what's being captured. You don't know what's going to be used in what sequence, right? Like how this thing ultimately gets put together is how the message gets delivered. And so we really didn't have any idea. We just had the hope and the faith in Lynn and Sarah, and their ability to really convey this message in the amazing way that they actually successfully did. So yeah, I had hope, right? And I knew that if done well, it could have an impact, but I didn't know the impact that it would ultimately have, right? It could have flopped. It could have been received negatively, and then like all my worst fears could have came true. Fortunately, they didn't.
And I assume that you were pleased with the end product.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I at the end, it's still a very emotional film for me to watch. And yeah, I couldn't be happier with the end product. Actually, I'm really proud of the work that they did and all the work that they put in to making it something that we would be proud of.
Well, I have to say that I'm appreciative of the fact that, you along with some of the other students were so open and transparent and invited us in to something that could be considered uncomfortable. I think I learned a lot even watching the documentary. And so I also want to pull in Karima. Audience, I would like to welcome Karima Hanifa, who recently earned her associate's degree in positive human development and social change from Life University, where she is working on her bachelor's in psychology. She is a criminal justice reform advocate and reentry consultant with a nationwide podcast addressing issues involving reentry in America. So, Karima, thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation and opportunity to be present here on the panel tonight. Thank you, and thank the audience as well.
Absolutely. I wanted to know if you could just tell us a bit about your educational background.
Okay, so my educational background, initially I went to private school in my early youth, and then I studied abroad for 6 months. And then I came back to the United States and ended up in public school, which was a culture shock for me, which kind of did a spin in my life. You know, some things began to change. So I was incarcerated at the age of 15. So from the age of 15 to 41, I was inside of a Georgia Department of Corrections facility. And so I didn't have an opportunity to cross a stage in my entire life. I received my GED while I was in prison. I received my cosmetology license while I was in prison. And I enrolled in Life University's Positive Human Development and Social Change, the Shalon Project, while I was incarcerated. And so I didn't have an opportunity to walk across a stage until after I was released. I was able to actually graduate and receive my associates in psychology and walk across that stage at Life University, which was like life-changing for me because it was something that had never happened. So it was almost like a historic moment in my life, you know.
Sure. So let me ask you this. What was the difference between your early education and the higher education you received while incarcerated?
So I think because I was so young when I went to prison that I really didn't take academia seriously. Once I started taking my 101s, like doors just began to open up as I began to think about systems and how they work. You know, we have social systems and political systems and, you know, a variation of systems that exist where I always saw like certain things such as like poverty, the unevenness of, you know, those that are wealthy and those that are in the state of poverty. And I always saw it as like something wasn't right or unjust, but I was unable to name those wrongs until I was introduced to academia. So academia definitely like just changed my life. It made me see things differently. It helped me understand like the behavior of humans. You know, it was interesting, very, very interesting.
No, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. And Corie, I think this is a good part to pull you in. Audience, please welcome Corie Claiborne. Corie is an associate professor of English and American literature at Morehouse. She was a prison education fellow for 2020-2021 and served as a social justice fellow through the Andrew Young Center for Global Leadership in 2020. She is the host of the Black Past, Black Futures podcast, which highlights African-American study scholars and scholarship in the Atlanta University Center. And she also took me down to Burris to get me started. So I am forever grateful, Corie, for that. I appreciate that. And so I want to bring you in, and I just want to start with this question. What made you interested in prison education?
Well, you know, I have to thank Giovanni because he inspired me, right? Like you talk about hoping that documentary impacts people. Well, it definitely had an impact, right? And I think that one of the things, as Karima said, that sometimes you have to have somebody help you put ideas together, right? Understand how systems work, right? And I think that I'd always known that. And I'd read amazing, just think about literature where people write about sort of transformation in prison, right? The autobiographic, I can't talk, autobiography of Malcolm X. Thank you, I have to slow it down, I'm talking too fast, right? And another great book by Asha Bandeli is called The Prisoner's Wife, right? Like, so I'd read all of these books that sort of talked about, you know, the function of education and being in this space, right? But I didn't really sort of understand what that meant. And then I also didn't really understand how I can be involved, right? And I think that's a really important part, right? This moment where Morehouse, you know, presents to me this opportunity, you know, that I'd already been thinking about because of watching this documentary. And so it was a, you know, just, I don't want to say it was, you know, divine, but it seemed to align with, certain kind of things that I'd already been thinking, and really sort of the mission of Morehouse, right? So.
I think that's important. And, one of the things that sort of stands out to me is that we sort of all came to this point for different reasons, right? And I fully appreciate your reasoning for getting involved with prison education. I think the work you're doing is great. And, for me, I started off my legal career as a baby attorney, as a prosecutor. And, I was only 2 to 3 months in when I literally was just getting sick to my stomach going to work every day, because I immediately saw the disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities with, over arrests, over incarceration of individuals. And, I actually had the opportunity to start Atlanta's Community Court, which, sort of sought to reduce the rate of recidivism through alternative sentencing. So now being able to see prison education reform and the value of that has just really been sort of coming full circle. And, I'm grateful, just like I'm sure you are, to have this unique opportunity. And so my next question, Corie, is, generally speaking, do your incarcerated students begin their college education prepared academically by their K-12 education?
Well, I mean, that's a complex question, right? Does anybody begin their college, journey, prepared by the K-12 system? And my answer would be today that the answer is no, but it's for different reasons. And I think that oftentimes it is because of, what the K-12 system, especially for Black and Brown students, what it expects of them, right? Which is not much. And I think that what I hear, which is common in students that I've taught at Auburn, is common in students I've taught at Ohio State, and in students at Morehouse and at Burris, right, was that, well, they start off thinking, well, I'm not a good writer, right? Like, I probably am not going to, just forgive everything I say. I know that I'm not good putting my ideas together. So they start there with apologies, right? And then what you realize is that, they're great writers, and especially my students at Burris, they were very clear about what they wanted to say. Like, they're, like I said, they had thought critically about a lot of ideas, but I realized no one had ever said to them, you're a good writer, right? This is amazing, right? Like, you are doing such a good job. And that just small thing, and the same with students at Morehouse. Like, no one had ever said to them, oh, you are really good at this, right? Or expected them to be good at this, right? Like, especially for Black men that we teach at Morehouse, like, a lot of what the K-12 educational system will say, well, okay, Black men don't, score very well on tests with reading. We don't score very well on, English portions of whatever state exams that they have. So they go in with this sort of deficit model where they say, well, maybe I'm not supposed to be good at this, right? Like, and so if they do well, it's like, oh, okay, well, you managed to overcome this, deficit that you have. And I think that is the thing that I hate the most about the K-12 system. Sometimes it is great, but a lot of times it highlights, I think, the problems and does not highlight the actual learner, right? Where they are. It doesn't encourage them to do whatever it is that they should do, right? So a lot of people become disaffected. Like Karima talked about, she didn't really take it seriously. I mean, I think that is our greatest problem, right? Like, that people can't see what the function of education is very early on.
So I will say, I asked you a question that I don't even know that if I could answer, right? But I will say this, that, I'm not sure if they were prepared by their K-12 education, but what I will say is that the work that I got was just awesome work. To your point,
Awesome.
Like, it was clear that they were critical thinkers. It was clear that they put in the time and effort and energy to producing quality work. And I actually saved everything that they wrote, the assignment, like, I have it saved because I think it's just that great.
Yeah, me too.
And I also wanted to ask you, can you tell us a bit about the work Morehouse is doing in higher education in prison?
Right. So, well, I was a part of a cohort of 5. So yourself, um, let's see who else. Stephanie Dunn, who's currently teaching creative writing. Keith Hollingsworth, who's teaching about Black entrepreneurship. Kipton Jensen, who is doing really sort of like things around the philosophy of freedom and liberation. And I think that it was a unique opportunity in the sense that we had people like Sinead Young, who have been working with Common Good Atlanta for a long time. But I think that what's so great about this past year is that they coalesced it into a program where they're able to bring more people in, right? To get more people engaged. So the next cohort, I guess, of people working, you're going to be, I think, one of the professors again next year, Winfield, correct? But I think that, but it's so great to see now we really have an ongoing presence. And one thing I do understand, being Morehouse professors and being especially in Burris, but I'm sure in other prisons, mattered to those students, right? Like they were so happy that we were there. A lot of them were happy that we were Black. A lot of them were happy just to understand that that this is not a prison, just a prison population to us. This is a group of students who are not forgotten. And I think that's the biggest struggle for really around, getting people involved in the, wanting to teach in prisons is just like, there's this erasure around the fact that, that is even happening, right? Like that these are people who want to learn, that want to be engaged. Right.
And I will say that, not only are we teaching there, but I don't think anybody is watering down what we're teaching. I mean, I know I'm teaching the same way that I teach my Morehouse students.
Exactly.
I'm teaching exactly that way in college. I mean, at the prison, and it's just amazing. Sarah, I want to pull you in, before we show the next clip, and I just want to introduce the audience to you and say that Sarah Higginbotham co-founded and now serves as the executive director for Common Good Atlanta, which offers accredited college courses in 4 state prisons 5 days a week. Sarah also studies and teaches early modern literature at Emory's Oxford College, focusing on the intersections of literature and law. So Sarah, can you please tell us why you started Common Good Atlanta? I feel like I know the answer, but you need to share it with everyone.
Well, thank you. I think it's really important for the students who are here listening to know that I certainly didn't recognize that I was starting something, particularly not a nonprofit that now has hundreds of talented faculty like you and Dr. Claiborne and Dr. Young and Dr. Jensen, and that offers accredited courses inside men's and women's prisons. But I believed I was doing what I think all human beings are called to do if we want to live a meaningful life, and that is connect what gives us deep joy with what the world needs. So quite simply, I love to discuss ideas. And as everyone in this space knows who has been inside a prison classroom, you have an astronomically high level of intellectual discussion. And so I did have a beloved uncle who was sentenced to prison when I was in my 20s. And I wanted to make sure going forward that anyone like him who had been alienated from the communities where they had lived, I wanted them to know that those of us on the outside still cared and still believed in them. So I just wanted to connect what I was called to do with the world.
No, I think that's fantastic. And I mean, I just want to know for the audience, what exactly does Common Good Atlanta do?
It's very simple, really. We bridge Georgia's colleges and universities with people inside Georgia's prisons. And what that does by taking college programming inside, I think you heard it from Karima, she learned to see and name systems operating around her. This is what college should do. It should give people the opportunity to critique the systems that are oppressing them. It should extend human dignity to people. It should be providing generative conversations with people, both inside and those of us on the outside. So that's what we do.
Okay, Patrick, let me pull you in. Audience, please welcome Patrick Rodriguez. Patrick is a formerly incarcerated person who is now the co-executive director for the Georgia Coalition for Higher Education in Prison, the director of advocacy and community engagement for Common Good Atlanta, is a justice policy fellow for the Education Trust, and was selected to be a part of the Georgia Association for Latino Elected Officials 2021 Leadership Cohort. So Patrick, can you tell us briefly what the Georgia Coalition for Higher Education in Prison does?
Yeah, so thank you so much. Prior to my release, I was released in December of 2019. And before I jump into that, just big shout out to Morehouse and College Behind Bars for bringing this together this evening. It's wonderful to be invited here. Prior to my release around 2020, the coalition was the coming together of prison education programs of faculty specifically, and also directly impacted students. And so when you look at the landscape of prison education in Georgia and all of the prison education programs, sometimes it's one professor in one prison serving just this one class, right? And so when you think about the capacity of that individual and how they are serving the students in the way that they can, they may not have that capacity to serve them on the other side when they're released. And so what the coalition does is we bring together all of the prison education programs to have discussions, to think about ideas, and to enact in ways to where we can serve and support the students that are currently being served by the universities in this moment. And so we are excited to be here. I'm excited to work with all of these wonderful individuals. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I think it's time for our next clip. If we could play the second clip, please.
There are things that, I take for granted when I'm teaching at MIT that I can just do that I can't do here. The mixed media that you'll use inside a classroom at an elite institution that I can't reproduce here. Here, you go back to a more basic teaching structure.
So what else I have, so U1, A1, U2, A2, so U3, A3, and plus now U4, A4, okay?
Our students in BPI show up to class extraordinarily well prepared. And so a lot of that sort of gimmickry that we don't need here as much because actually everyone's done the reading.
Essentially what you're doing is you're combining all of the components
yes,
of your vector and
I'm going to just put this, you see, I just use commutativity, and
so
put
you're
this
collecting
one
the terms.
and this one together, so that's what I'm looking for, okay? That's what I'm looking for.
下面这个 part 是什么？马，所以所有的 vehicle， 这是什么？这是听，这是什么？
我不记得。
这是什么？
Your car already stopped or 再说一遍。
车已经停在停车场了。
停车。
There you go. Thank you.
Okay, Corie, I'm going to turn back to you because I know that this goes exactly to what we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
We don't water down the instruction. We do not water down the lesson. As you can see, that was not a watered down lesson. Those were lessons that I'm ill prepared for, okay?
Right. I'm thinking about trying at this point to try to learn Chinese, and I'm like, woo, I don't know how they do this. Like I would be the worst student in history, but yes.
I wanted to ask you, in watching that clip, does it resonate with you and your experience?
It definitely does. I mean, one of the things is, besides, just understanding that you're teaching the same material, but, you do have to use different strategies. I mean, one of the things we experienced is teaching in this pandemic, right? Which meant a very different kind of interaction. You got to be in person at least, but I wasn't in person at all, right? So that really makes you think about if all of your responses are just literally written down on paper and you have to give it to somebody, it makes you think more deeply about what you say. And you have to be more deliberate about it, right? And I think that you only know your students through their words, which I think is a really interesting thing too, but it is very rigorous. I mean, there's nothing that, I mean, my students might have complained about reading The Heart of Darkness and, half of the other things that I had them reading, but I thought that it was still rigorous, right? And not only that, I mean, they were putting together ideas that they had from other classes in a way that even my Morehouse students don't, right? Like I was constantly amazed by, they say, oh, well, remember when we did this in philosophy, or we talked about this in another class, or somebody who has an interest in opera and classical music was like, oh yeah, this reminds me of this, right? And yeah, I think that it's just a fabulous, even with like some limitations, but it's just like a haiku, right? Like you have limitations, it's a short poem, but you're able to express so much, even in those limitations. And that's what I found there, so.
I think also the takeaway of what you're saying is that you found your students to be very well prepared.
Oh, very well, yeah, definitely.
I have to say, I was a little bit taken aback because we were in this pandemic. Sarah took the materials, the books down to the students in advance. And, the students had read the book before I could even start the first lesson, which that's really intimidating when you walk into a room and we already have read the book. They ended up reading it a second time as we went through the lessons, which, never happens in any other place.
No.
So let me also ask you, were there any other key differences between your inside and outside students?
Well, just one of the things, there is a difference between teaching adults, right? I don't want to make my Morehouse students feel like they're so very young and inexperienced, but there is a difference, right? And I think that, people bring to whatever they're studying, whatever they're reading, where they are in life, right? So there is a different kind of awareness that I wasn't used to, I think, on the part of students, which is actually great. I find myself more, and I'm not, like I said, again, I love my Morehouse students, but something simple about history, right? It's interesting in the beginning clip, the first man they showed, Rodney Spivey Jones, who writes this wonderful sort of senior project. I mean, he was sort of talking about Emmett Till in 1955 and, his lynching as a 14-year-old. Now, my students know about it, right? They might have heard about Emmett Till and his being lynched, but they don't really understand, I think, the complexities of those kind of things. So I find more often than not, I'm sorry, explaining to them, well, here's this 14-year-old who was from out of town, he didn't do anything, and the jury immediately, found people not guilty. And imagine that this didn't only happen this once, but it happened every single time. People would be lynched, Black people would be disappeared and killed, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, right? And they don't seem to, like I said, they didn't put it together in a way that somebody that is older, might understand. They might have heard about it, but they didn't understand the, ideas around the case, why it is something that is so resonant with, I think, people today. So I feel like there is much more just life knowledge that students have. But again, that's not to say that the Morehouse students can't have it, but usually I'm trying to impart that life knowledge to them, whereas older students already know that. So.
Sure. I also think that for me, one of the other differences is that the students there, maybe because, they felt like they were being given an opportunity that they otherwise wouldn't have had. They were much more hungry for the information. So not only were they reading the book before I arrived and then again, but they were also asking me for, outside reading,
Right.
Can you supplement this? I would like to know more about this, which, it could be an age thing, could be because they're older, could be because, they just really feel very like they're receiving something that's very beneficial. So.
Right. And I think that, there's a lot that speaks to me just about being at Morehouse, like understanding the function of Morehouse as this place that started after slavery to educate the people, the sons of the people who had been enslaved, And you think that the way that they thought about education, right? Like if you hear how, say, for example, Frederick Douglass talks about knowledge, right? So like learning to read, he says, makes him forever unfit to be a slave. And he takes it so seriously, right? That he's willing to do everything he can to get knowledge, because he was like, if they want to keep it from me, it means it's something that I have to have. There is that kind of hunger that I saw in the students at Burris, right? Like, this is something that they're trying to keep away from me. So it's something that I need to have, right? Like, and I'm going to ask my professors for extra reading. I'm going to try to do everything else, you know, to sort of even self-educate beyond the classroom. So definitely.
Sure, sure. Patrick, let me just bring you in. We see BPI provides a highly rigorous education. As far as I know, they even have an internationally recognized debate team. So do you think, can and should all colleges and universities providing higher education in prison be expected to provide a high quality, academically rigorous college education?
I think that's a great question. And let me just start by kind of building off of what Corie just stated. You referenced Frederick Douglass, right? And then Angela Davis said it is a recognition of that condition that is a rejection of. And so before I answer that question, it is us as students, as individuals who are part of college behind bars, who are part of prison education programs, to where we're able to reflect on the conditions that we are a part of, right? And so upon that reflection, we kind of gain that liberation. And so when you look at the individual and how we go past our current condition, and then when you look at the system of the university, it is almost the responsibility of the university to not just simply be an institution when you look at it as it is, but to be a contributor to the community, and to not forget about its citizens, and to not forget about the individuals who currently made choices and who are currently behind bars. And just like you stated earlier, Winfield, it's sometimes some people's first encounter with higher education. Imagine what it feels like if you've never gone to college and then you're sitting in the same with a professor from Morehouse. Morehouse is a prestigious school. And you guys are taking that and you're understanding, you're self-reflecting, where does Morehouse stand in, not just in the community of Atlanta, but in this fight to redo our country's dark past, to try to do something different so that when we talk about Black and brown people, we are not consistently put in this box and unable to access education, yet we are looking to help our brothers and sisters that are currently incarcerated understand that they made a choice, that they are here. Let's reflect. Now let's move past and let's become greater than, so that we can begin contributing. And then the next generations don't have to go through that, because minus prison education, everyone knows that education reduces the chance of somebody getting incarcerated, just point blank, period. And that's not even to talk about the educational numbers in prison education on how that recidivism is reduced dramatically. If I'm not mistaken, I'm actually not mistaken, I'm 100% positive that individuals who have gone through Common Good Atlanta, they have a less than 5% recidivism that is, it's unsurmountable. It's uncomparable when you kind of think about it and look at the grander picture. And so forgive me for getting a little passionate. My father was a preacher. So I kind of talk with a little bit of jazz, and I was born in 91. And so I'm almost at that point where I can say I'm a little bit old, but I'm not quite there yet. I'm gonna kick it back over to you, Winfield.
Well, I just want to say, with all that passion, you would do excellent on the debate team or moot court team at Morehouse. The next question is two-part. Is prison education in Georgia as rigorous as BPI, and is it degree offering? That's for you, Pat.
Yeah, so there's multiple, like when you look at prison education, there's multiple offerings, right? So you have course accredited, you have certificate offerings, and then you also have degree bearing. So I'm not sure if rigorous would be the right terminology in this question, because I think that the access to, that's what the standards are that are currently in place, which leave out Black and brown men. Is it rigorous enough for them to pass this test? Is it rigorous enough for them to score on this LSAT, on this SAT? So what I know for a fact that happens specifically with Common Good Atlanta, it's looking at not telling somebody they're smart, but it's looking at what they did that makes them smart and not labeling them as such. So I would not be able to make a comparative analysis as to what BPI does versus what is happening here in Georgia. But what I do know in Georgia, as working with the coalition, is that we work to do what is called the CARES model, which is congratulate, ask for more questions, request more, say about this, evaluate, and then summarize. And as a professor, you're giving to that student just as much as you're giving to them. So there's that dialogue that happens within the assignments that are given.
Perfect. Okay. Giovanni, let me ask you a question. This is a hard one, okay? Are you ready? So what do you think your reentry would have looked like, given that you served 12 years in prison, beginning at the age of 16, had you not had this college education? What would reentry have looked like?
Well, I know one thing that's very easy for me to say, because it's something that I always use. Like, it's something that I realized a long time ago. Crime would have definitely still been an option for me, right? Like, it was definitely something that was like a plan, G or something. There was definitely like, yo, if all else fails, like, I know how to do these things, right? I went to college and had the veil lifted and my mind expanded, and it was no longer even in the universe of my thought, right? Like, I had so many other ideas of things I wanted to explore, right? That I wanted to leave all the old things I already knew about behind. And so I think that my reentry would have been, one, a lot more difficult. Two, I've been struggling, I have come home and struggled with mental health, having grown up in that environment. And so I would have had a lot more of a difficult time, one, assessing that's what I was dealing with and experiencing in those moments. And two, knowing what to do, right? So that I'm not reacting impulsively out of anxiety, because I understand that it's anxiety. I understand the new path. I understand that maybe I just need to remove myself from the things that are making me anxious. And this is the capacity of thought that my college education gave me, right? These are the tools that it afforded me, that I don't think I had in the same, at the same level prior to going through it.
Sure. No, that's all very fair. Thank you for being so open and transparent again. We really do appreciate it. Karima, could you describe for us a powerful experience that you had inside the classroom?
Yes. So there were 3, and I'll make them very brief. One was, and it came to mind when we were talking about the debate teams, right? So there was, it may have been an English critical thinking class where we actually had to do Lincoln's debates, right? And so one of our teachers that came from Emory, that was part of the Shalon Project, began to share a story with us about the monks and how they debate and how they would be like SARS. So we didn't even understand what SARS meant as they completed each debate, but we began to say to each other SARS. But it helped us to think critically about how maybe we were against abortion, but we had to learn to speak in favor of and pull up articles, text that supported our ideas. So that was awesome. So that was one of the very great experiences. Another experience I had was, so I will brag that of 60 students, we had a 3.7 GPA, right? Out of 60 women who, some of them hadn't been in school for 20 years. We had put in place a pact amongst ourselves, and it was called No Child Left Behind is what we called it, right? We got it from off of the news, but we would ask questions and inquire and ask for more reading material, and our teacher would be up there teaching statistics and psychology and abnormal psychology and sociology for hours and hours and hours. There was this hunger and this thirst, right? And we would keep asking questions until everyone in that class understood, so that when we took that test, we came out high-fiving each other because we knew that we had everything we needed to do our best. So that's 2. The last one is, there was an assignment for a class, I don't remember which class it was, but the final was that we had to do a TED Talk, right? I was so nervous. I stepped into an empty classroom alone and I had to record a 20 minutes talk. And so when I got done, I was very nervous and I went into the classroom and they were like, "You done, Kareem?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "When I get out of prison, I'm gonna do a TED Talk." And everybody laughed at me. I'll have you to know that I came out in April and in September received an email. I don't know how they got my information and said, are you interested in doing a TED Talk? And I thought, oh, what? I said I was gonna do this when I got home. So that was definitely a powerful, it was like preparing me for my future that was to come.
Okay, well, I think you actually answered this next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway to see if you have anything else you want to add. How does the classroom experience bring about a sense of community? It sounds like, just based upon your last response, that there's a real sense of community there.
So it is, and also something else that really helped to create a sense of community, and this like goes back to the beginning of tonight's panel when someone was talking about like reading. It was on the film where they were talking about reading Shakespeare, right? So literally like we would receive, I think his name was Richard Wright. I think it's a very popular book that he wrote, right? The name will come to me. But literally like after we were done with our reading materials for different classes, we would pass the books out to people on the compound who had never been exposed to anything except for maybe like Zane or, you know, just some random entertaining Jerome Dickens, you know, just some fiction. And so we were able to have conversations with our peers to get them to kind of see things differently. I remember like reading Invisible Man as a kid, like just picking up and reading it and not understanding it, right? And then reading it from an academic lens and seeing something completely different. So it definitely, you know, created a sense of community because it gave us things to discuss with our peers that wasn't the normal dialogue. And, you know, like people talking about what's for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or visitation, but, you know, to give us a conversation that was of substance.
No, thank you so much. Sarah, I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question before our next clip. And I just want to ask you, what can community members do to support higher education in prison?
I think they can do three things. If they are able, they can support these programs financially to help us pay for books and supplies, for the modest stipends that we offer to our faculty, for their time, and for the accredited classes that we provide for free. I think that people in the community can also hire people who have felony convictions. We can shed that stigma that means they have to check a box on an application and they're not going to be as competitive as someone else. And finally, I think in addition to hiring them, recognizing that people who have served time in prison can make invaluable contributions to our communities, they can also advocate. They can vote for system impacted people to share our inherent rights, the right to housing, the right to vote for the people who will govern them, the right to an education, the right to employment, and the right to healthcare. So those are a couple things.
Wow, I think that's pretty powerful. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that. And let's go to our third and final clip.
The reality of the matter is that we're only 10% of the population in one prison. In one prison, we're 10% of the pop. What about the other prisons in the system, right? And the lack of programs, the lack of anything meaningful to these guys that we're saying we want to let them out, right? Is anybody like really stopping to explore? When we talk about reform on the ground in here, right, with the guys that we lock around, what does reform look like? What does it even mean to them?
I didn't come to prison to go to college. You know, I came here and I got really, really lucky and did some things right. But at no time do I want to be some type of poster boy for like, look at what prison can do for you. It's a very stressful and kind of disgusting place. You know, it's a bad place. If I had to choose to go to college, I would not do it here.
You framed it as you don't want to be an example of what prison can do for you. It's not what prison is doing for you. This is what education is doing for you.
True.
You go home and say, I messed up. I went to prison. You got lucky, like you said. You made it here. You got into BPI. You learned. And you are no longer the same person you was when we were together in 5 Points. Am I wrong?
No, you're not.
Did prison do that for you, or did education do that for you?
Education.
When I came to prison, the first thing I was thinking about was how do I get into college? That was my primary concern. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. There are groups all over the prisons, all over them. They're ready. They're ready, they just need the opportunity. And then they will do whatever it takes to get in that seat.
The overwhelming majority of individuals are going to be released from prison. They're coming back home, they're coming back into their communities. So if I'm able to successfully intervene in their lives, then I'm saving further victimization. I'm saving taxpayer dollars.
The way I look at it is, would you prefer a person who messed up sometime in life, committed a crime, got arrested for it, came to prison, and did absolutely positively nothing, move next door to you and plot on your house? Or would you prefer a person who messed up, corrected that mistake, got an education, came out and had a good job, and instead of them plotting on your house, you're having barbecues or something together?
Hello, Picture Motion, Jules speaking.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. Giovanni, I'm gonna come directly to you and say, when and how did you know the impact your education was having on you and your classmates? It seemed like, that was part of the focus of that clip there.
Yeah, there's something that we say is that it's really hard to explain to someone, why they should put themselves through what going through college in prison is like, right? It's not easy. But I think that for me in particular, I knew that, something was happening for me when I realized that I was no longer thinking the same, right? And I actually have a little story for that, right? Because I remember the exact moment when I realized that something was happening, right? And it was like, I can't remember if it was either after midterms or finals, but I remember just like being done with academics. I was like, all right, finished my last exam or paper. I'm done. I just want to we called it read some ignorant, right? So I wanted to read something that had nothing to do with academia. So I picked up, I remember if it was like a Source or a Double XL magazine, like a hip hop magazine. And I opened it up and I laid in my bunk and I started to read the article that I thought would be interesting. And about 2 paragraphs in, I find myself critiquing this writer. And I find myself critiquing this writer's choice of a semicolon in the middle of the sentence, right? And this is not like something that I'm not supposed to be doing this, because again, remember, I didn't want to do anything, but that's when it hit, and I was like, wow. I felt empowered in a way, because like I was thinking on a different level with a different frequency. My mind had sort of just become accustomed to, asking questions, to analyzing things, to taking things and not just like taking things for granted, but like, taking things and looking at them through different lenses. It was, for me, it was it was exciting. It was addicting. I wanted more. It made me want to delve more into my education. It made me want to learn more. It made me want to feel, that freedom that I felt, that liberation that I felt. I was liberated from old ideas that no longer serve me. I was able to liberate myself from old opinions that were told to me that I assumed were mine, but I just accepted, right? I'd never actually really questioned them. But going to college, really helped me develop that ability to critically assess things and question things, and move in the direction and develop into the person that I wanted to be.
It sounds like your BPI education really transformed everything for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like Kareem had said earlier, it gave me words for systems that had affected me, that I've been subject to my entire life, that I really didn't know existed, right? But I now had a word for it. I now understood it. And so I could position myself in, in reference to all these other things, right? All these other, history, redlining, just like so many things that I didn't, that I knew of, right? That like my primary education kind of, introduced me to, but they never connected the dots, and they never gave me the tools to connect the dots. And that was what was missing, was my ability to connect the dots from all these different things and use them actively, like today.
It's so funny that you should mention redlining, because that was one of the topics I spoke about at yours, and it became one of the hottest topics. I mean, they just wanted more and more, and I never realized that redlining was so interesting. I mean, I was interested, but now I have people that were just as interested as me. Sarah, I'm going to go back to you for just a second and say, we know that Georgia has one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. How important is it that organizations like yours, which work directly with the Department of Corrections, partner with the DOC to provide high caliber education and programming opportunities?
Right. It's important because every year Georgia releases about 16,000 people from prison back into our neighborhoods, as the documentary just said. And I think that's something that the media and sort of tough on crime politicians, they don't want us to think about that stage. But it is happening. And when you have the opportunity to, as Patrick, Karima, and Giovanni have all just said, when you have the opportunity to reconnect with your own human dignity and to be able to understand the systems that are at play, to have conversations with people, that changes everything. I think that the more that we can do as colleges and universities to be able to address the injustice that has led to what we call the prison industrial complex or mass incarceration, the more that we can do to mitigate those effects, those of us who work or teach or study at a university, the stronger our communities will be.
Agreed. The one thing that strikes me so often is how many times we forget that people that are directly impacted by incarceration are humans. They're humans, and I could go on and on, but let me just keep with the program. Karima, let me ask you a question. For members of our audience that may be unaware, can you briefly highlight the challenges facing an individual embarking on reentry?
Yes, so of course, like there are housing barriers, right? There are employment barriers. There are voting right barriers. There are even like barriers around traveling and how you can travel and when you can travel. And so one of the challenges that I faced was with a background check, even though it had been 26 years. And I was very fortunate that I didn't have to face the background check head on, but everyone who had come out of prison was talking about how, they sit in interviews and they tell their story and then they get a call back and say, sorry, we can't use you. And so my resolve for that problem was I knew that I was a licensed cosmetologist. And so I just opened my own business where I could employ myself and I didn't have to answer to anybody about why I was in prison, how long I was there and what, tell us details of what happened. And so that was one of the barriers that I specifically faced. Something else that we don't give enough attention to, or we don't talk about enough, is the psychological barriers. And so after being told what to do every single day of my life for 26 years, it was a difficult transition, like to not be told what to do, to have to make decisions on my own, And it's like, I remember going in a store with a debit card and not knowing how to swipe and people looking at me like, you 40 something years old, what do you mean you don't know, right? And I didn't know. So that was definitely a barrier, for my reentry.
While, people are impacted by incarceration, the world continues to evolve. The world continues to change. Like computers, evolve, skill sets change, right? So I definitely understand that, until you experience it.
These didn't exist. These didn't exist 26 years, 30 years ago. These did not exist. Cash App, I couldn't fathom. How is there money in the phone? That spooked me so bad. I just couldn't get it. I didn't get it.
This is also really important, Karima. Can you share with the audience the work you're doing for voting rights advocacy?
Yes, of course I can. So I work for a nonprofit organization called Iman Atlanta, which is the Inner City Muslim Action Network. And so we are an organization that provides mental health services, housing, vocational training for individuals that are reentering back into society. And so we also do a lot of advocacy and organizing work as well. And so we have started a petition called the No Taxation Without Representation campaign at Iman Atlanta, in which we are championing this petition. We have began a coalition with other organizations to get, other organizations that are doing a similar work around voting rights involved. So in the state of Georgia, if you are currently on probation or parole, it is a crime for you to register to vote, not even vote, just register. And sometimes it does happen accidentally, because as I was applying for my driver's license, there was a section that asked, can this information be used to register you to vote? And you couldn't go to the next section without clicking the box. And I was thinking, like, how do I get around this? And so in Georgia, every Georgian is required to pay taxes, right? We don't think about it, but every time you buy soda, chips, food, if you own a vehicle, you pay taxes. If you own property, you pay taxes. But if you are currently on supervision in the state of Georgia, you are not allowed to decide who's going to be the mayor, the governor, the sheriff, any of those elected officials. We are not allowed to participate in Georgia's democracy or the democracy of the United States, which would include the president. So what we are doing is creating an awareness and actually doing some legislative work around restoring voting rights to the 266,000 individuals here in Georgia who are disenfranchised, who are not allowed to vote because they are on supervision.
Wow, thank you. And thank you for doing that important work, Karima. Giovanni, let me ask you, how important is education in teaching a person about what it means to be a citizen and part of society?
Oh wow, that's so hard. Before I get into that, first I just want to say amen to Karima for taking on that initiative. I can't remember how many years ago we got our voting rights restored here in New York. And ever since then, I constantly feel like it's definitely had an impact in like having other criminal justice reforms passed over the last several years. Right now that we have the ability to vote, right, are numerous, you know, in number in New York, and so, you know, are really loud about, you know, the things and reforms that we want to see, and have like had really great wins over the last few years. And so, like, yeah, I just want to say that to say keep up the fight. Super important to have representation, to have a voice, and, you know, things sort of start falling, you know, after, you know, I honestly believe that, you know, that win will lead to other wins. Now to address your question, I didn't really understand what a citizen, what a citizen was, what, you know, the responsibilities of the citizen prior to going to college. No one had actually sat down and explained it to me. Like in my life, no one had ever in school, no teacher, no adult had ever explained to me what it was that I was supposed to do as a citizen, what it meant, what my responsibilities to the rest of society was, right? Like I'd grown up in a very small community, low income neighborhood, right? Like I thought my responsibility was to my family and my friends, my homies, the people I actually knew, right? Outside of that, like you a stranger, I don't know you, like I go out, you know, keep it pushing, like, but, you know, like I said earlier, right, making connections and being able to connect these dots, you know, and then understanding the larger picture, you know, and getting a more focused picture of what you're dealing with, or where you are in life, you know, where you are in the larger milieu of things, you know, really helped ground me and really helped me understand why it's important, right, to practice, you know, to be a citizen, right, and practice my civic duty, right, to inform others of the importance of practicing their civic duty, because this is how we change things. This is how we actually make change in this world. And so, like I said, I had no understanding of what my responsibilities as a citizen was, or an idea of citizenship prior to going to college.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think it's clear, obviously, that prison education is important for a lot of reasons. Of course, you know, it helps to reduce the rate of recidivism, but it also is transformative just for the person, right? It helps the person. Sarah, I want to ask you, what happens when a student returns home before they complete their education?
Well, one of the things that Common Good Atlanta does, and thanks to Gideon's Promise, who partners with us on this, is that Common Good Atlanta offers free classes for anyone who is system impacted, even if you haven't served time in prison, but you have felony convictions that are making the rights that Karima addressed earlier difficult. Whether or not they were part of a college and prison program or not, they can join us for free. We teach on Zoom. When we're in person, we teach at the offices of Gideon's Promise at Marietta Street. We provide home-cooked meals when they're there for class. We provide MARTA cards, so transportation isn't an issue. And we even provide homework help for their children on site where the classes are occurring. And then maybe most importantly, we provide a community where people who have somehow been impacted by the system can come, can be engaged with faculty, engaged with writing tutors. We can help with applications in addition to the college credits that we're offering. And just a quick shout out to Patrick, who I think has written 2 grants where he's been able to connect people leaving prison who want to continue their education with laptops, with a clothing allowance for business clothes. You could say more, Patrick, but the people on this screen and that are working in the city of Atlanta and the state of Georgia are doing a lot for people. We appreciate everybody's support.
And I just want to, this is a shameless plug, but I just want to say that Morehouse has an excellent internship program with Gideon's Promise. Students who are on the line, make sure you contact one of us. But also, I want to turn back. We have questions from the audience that I really want to get to, but there's one other question that I want to ask before we go there. So Sarah, Giovanni, Karima, Patrick, is there anything you would like an individual unfamiliar with prison education to know or learn today that we have not already addressed? Yes, Karima.
I just want to say that if there is anyone here that is present that can be impactful, I wish that more individuals had an opportunity for access to education, because it is a life changer. It is. And thank you so much, Giovanni, for the point that you made. You might hear me quote you later. I'll try to remember to give you credit. Prison did not help me or change me. Education is what changed my life. Thank you so much.
That is very important. Patrick, did you have anything? Giovanni, Sarah?
Yeah, I'll jump in here real quick. And just really quickly, you talked about humanizing, right? And so having events like this give individuals that may have never heard from somebody who's been formerly incarcerated the opportunity to hear that. And last night I was able to speak at Emory for the Beyond the Box campaign that was just highlighted in the chat. And I watched a young lady in real time challenge everything that she had ever thought about somebody who'd been incarcerated before. And she started with saying, I've never heard from or ever met anybody who's ever been to prison before. And so having this conversation with you is making me think differently about how I view those types of people. And I was like, it was amazing, right? And so we have 96 people in the audience, and maybe one of them has never heard from somebody, but you're witnessing the power of education and then the power of it being delivered in the prison system. And so there's not enough of it. And we're a great community, and we all work together down here in the South and also in the North. And you can see those like ties of that. I guess it's like just that that continuum of exactly what it is. We're working to give people an opportunity to be able to get past the choices that they made so that they can contribute to society.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just be brief. I agree with what both of them just said. To piggyback off what Patrick was speaking on. I think that this to the idea of exposure and and how it can change minds and change like opinions and just entire ideas that people have. I think that one thing that this film did for a lot of people was it showed them that they held a lot of assumptions about, may have held a lot of assumptions about the people who are in prison and what they're capable of, right? And it wasn't until they were actually shown what is actually happening in some of these walls and what people are actually able to accomplish when given the opportunity, that they're sort of just begin to say like, you get called on that assumption, and then you begin to think like, wow, I was wrong, and then you're open to other, to this expansion of this idea, right? And I think that it's important for people to always understand that we do have a lot of assumptions of things. We do hold many assumptions of things, and that insight actually requires us, right? True insight on things actually requires us to go out there and learn for ourselves, to go out there and see for ourselves and explore, right? And do our own due diligence, right? If we really want to say that we hold opinions or that we know about something, right? That we truly can speak on something, or that our ideas are rooted in fact. And so just to say that there are things that we sometimes don't consider, that if we, you know, that when it comes to prison education, understand that what we've spoke about it scratches the surface on what's truly possible and what's truly going on, and that, you know, people should do their due diligence. People should really go out there and do more research into the subject and learn as much as they can, because it's really amazing what these programs can do and are doing.
Thank you so much. Sarah, did you have anything to add, or I'll jump into audience questions?
I cannot add on to those three.
Okay, so the first question from the audience is, I assume it must be intimidating considering this is a group often stigmatized and ostracized. What's one way you pushed past your comfort zone to fully and objectively impart your knowledge on the students inside the prison? So, Corie, that sounds...
Yes, I'll answer that. I mean, I guess what everybody is saying reinforces how I felt. I mean, this, you know, it wasn't a different community. People in prison are my community, right? And it's the same way I hear some people say to me, well, oh, it must be intimidating to teach all classes of all Black men at Morehouse. And I'm like, no, right? Like, it's like, it never occurred to me, right? Like, to feel like, oh, this is somehow I need to be intimidated or feel unsafe, because it's still my community. And the people that I taught were my community. So I can understand for anybody thinking about teaching in prisons, how it might be, how you might have some anxiety around it, how you might be afraid, because it's not a nice place, right? Like, it's not there to comfort you, to make you feel welcome. That is very much the case, right? Like, even when I went in there, I was like, okay, it makes you feel a certain sort of way. However, the people there, literally from the chaplain who greeted us, like, just the people there, including the students who are incarcerated, they are people, right? Like, they are my community. And I can't stress that enough. So there wasn't the same, and maybe that's because I work at a historically Black college, but there probably, for me, maybe Winfield could talk about, wasn't the same kind of pushing past in terms of dealing with students and any particular fears that I had, but maybe you can speak a little bit more about that.
Well, I just want to say one thing first and foremost, is that, you know, there was nothing really for me to push past. I think, you know, I was concerned about how I would be able to connect with students when I initially came, but much like Corie, you know, the experience itself, not the building, not the facility, but the students, the chaplain, the people were so welcoming that there was really nothing for me to push past. And I think for me, it was just important for me to let them know that I didn't see any difference there, that the only thing I saw was a student that I was educating. That's it. At the end of the day, again, we're humans. And, you know, it was, apparently they were very appreciative of the fact that, you know, I was referring to them by names and not by numbers. But for me, that was an easy lift, because they are, I mean, they are humans and they do have names. So I want to say that. And I also want to get one more of these audience questions in. So this question is, were the participants, were those directly impacted by incarceration, were their interpersonal relationships affected by the program? For example, did you get closer to your children if you had them, or significant others if you had them? Did the program change you in that way? Or did education change you or impact your relationships? Karima?
Yes, so for me, my relationship with my siblings who have all gone to college, I was able to have a conversation with them around like what I was learning and how it was impacting my life and how it made me see things differently. Where before, like, I'm sorry, Giovanni, I just keep coming back. I keep coming back to you, right? But like, we have these opinions and we think that they're our own, but really we've been impacted by our environment. And so we began to see injustices as acceptable, but to actually like be able to have an educated conversation where I could quote strong text and reference to back what I was saying, to prove that it wasn't just an opinion, but that these things really did exist, created a very strong bond with my siblings, because I was able to talk to them about what I was learning. And a weird story is I remember calling one of my brother, who's like, oh, probably 26 years younger than me. And I remember calling him and saying, hey, I need help, Malik. All I remember is, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. I got to take a math class and I am lost. And he was like, okay, wait. That's all you remember? So yes, definitely I was able to bond with my siblings that way.
Okay, there's another question. This person says, I know incarceration leaves lasting trauma. How do you deal with that? Was it hard finding help for dealing with that trauma?
I guess I'll jump in here if that's okay, and then I'll pass it over to you, Giovanni. It's definitely difficult, and I think like to speak to Karima's fact of like going to Walmart and just feeling like everybody's like looking at you. Like I had to call my parole officer when I first got out, and I said, "What do I do?" I said, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, tell me what to do." And I stayed in the house for about 2 weeks, and they're like, "No, you can do whatever you want." And I'm like, but that's not, I'm gonna get in trouble. I can't do whatever I want. And I kind of dealt with that by looking for community. And Common Good Atlanta provided the Clementi course, that free downtown class. And so it wasn't necessarily a traditional, like going through all of the trauma that I've been through and unpacking all these things with the psychologist, but finding people who understood where I came from and then like respected where I wanted to go and then kind of supported that in the way that they could. That was dealing with trauma within itself. And so access to, if there are any psychologists out there or licensed social workers that want to pitch in, just send us an email and we're going to put you on staff immediately. Like that's facts. But in the truism of it, it's like that community that we found in the classroom and amongst each other has really, like, we check in once a week with the class, like, okay, I'm okay, like let's keep going. And it's like that was the way that I personally dealt with trauma.
Yeah, no, definitely has been a difficult journey in trying to addrse the mental health issues that I've come home with. And, because I'm constantly learning. There are things that sort of just, they come up in situationally, right? I've never been in a situation before. I'm in it today. And then I'm like, oh, shit. Oh, I don't know if I can say shit, but like, like where, I'm having this reaction to this moment, right? And I've never had it before because I've never been in this moment before. And so, finding one, I think a therapist that you feel comfortable enough speaking upon, the issues, one, because they come from a very specific context. And I don't expect anyone who's never been in prison to understand things exactly how they are contextually, right? Like when I say, when I make a reference to something or a feeling that originates from being incarcerated, it's hard for anyone who's never been in that situation to understand where it's coming from and not looking at it as like, this guy's kind of a little crazy. Like, why would he even think that or say that? Why would that even be a thought? And it's because like, it's just a completely different world with different rules. And that's where I grew up. And so, I think that we are definitely in need of a ton of formerly incarcerated therapists, right? Because there's a need for people to feel the comfort of being able to really fully express themselves, and with the assumption or with the understanding that they are going to be understood. So yeah, I've just struggled with that. For me, it's just like finding someone that I feel I'm gonna be comfortable enough to have the conversations that I need to have to deal with these things. Other than that, I rely on my alumni and my friends from who have come home. We're all really close, and we rely on each other when we are going through things that we know that no one else will really understand.
Sure. Okay, well, we are just about out of time, and I know someone's going to yell at me for this, but Corie, I just want to ask you one last question. You can try to answer this in 23 seconds.
I could talk water upstream, so that's going to be hard, but go ahead.
As a professor, what does it mean to you when you see your own students realize that education has changed them? I mean, we've heard Karima and Giovanni talk about the impact that education has had on them. What does that do to you from a professor's perspective, though?
Well, you know, I'm a fourth generation educator, right? My great grandparent was a teacher. My grandparents were teachers. My father is a professor. So, you know, what it does to me is reinforce the idea that education is transformative, right? Like I know that, right? Like I know that to be true from my own experiences here, and then also what I've seen over lifetime and what over generations, honestly. And so I just want to say that, I mean, I don't know if I could really wrap it up, right? Like it put a great spin on it, but it's just that I can see the change that education can make for everyone in every community. And I'm really committed to doing that. So I'm just so happy to be a part of this program. So.
All right, well, I think we are out of time, but I want to thank everyone for attending. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for being open, transparent, for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for all those that attended. I hope that you found this panel discussion worthwhile. This is just one part of a series, so expect more to come. Morehouse is really trying to do a great deal on this front, and so expect for there to be other projects, other panels, you name it, it will be coming. Also, College Behind Bars, the documentary, that can be found on Netflix, Amazon, or PBS Learning Media. So definitely check it out. I think that the documentary is one of the best that I have seen. And if you registered for tonight's panel, we will also be sending out or emailing out information on Morehouse's community partners. So with that, I say good night. Thank you so much.